Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Taylor Bowes, and I'm the Program Administrator for the DBE Supportive Services Program at NorCal PTAC. Today's webinar is called How to Submit Your Bid, and it will be presented by Ed Duarte, our Construction and Public Works Specialist. I see some familiar names on the participant list, which is great. It looks like a lot of you attended our webinar on Tuesday. However, that means that the first portion of this will be a little bit repetitive for you. I'm going to start out by, again, kind of just giving a really brief, broad overview of the DBE Supportive Services Program, and then I'll introduce Ed Duarte, and he'll start his presentation from there. A few housekeeping items right off the bat again. I'll email these slides out to you right after the webinar, so no need to take a lot of notes. And then for any questions you have, go ahead and type out those questions as we go using the chat function. That way you don't forget about your questions go through, but we'll wait until the very end to read through the questions. And also it'll kind of depend on how much time we have in the end as well. And then keep in mind that you can always schedule a one-on-one session with Ed anytime after this webinar. So if you have questions specific to your business, that's an option as well. We'll provide his email address for you. Okay. So the mission of the DBE Supportive Services Program is to help DBE certified firms be successful in the government marketplace, and specifically to help them win US DOT assisted contracts. So that's any contracts that have even $1 of federal funds behind them. Those contracts will have a DBE requirement or goal often. And so our goal is to help you be successful at bidding and winning. How we accomplish that goal is we provide a suite of services to DBE certified firms. Those services include market research, bid matching, bid submittal assistance, help with business plans, contract compliance, marketing to the government, networking with primes, and then all other registrations and certifications regarding government contracting as well. So SAM, Cal e-Procure, and then any of the other certifications like women-owned, minority-owned, etc. About our presenter today, Ed Duarte. He's our Construction and Public Works Specialist, like I said, and he's the founder and retired CEO of Aztec Consultants. Under his leadership, they performed on over $275 million of public works contracts and $300 million as the general contractor of record. And he's also the founder, program director, and former principal instructor for the Construction Management Certificate at Cal State East Bay. So if you were on the call on Tuesday, and if you've met with Ed separately, you guys all know he is amazing and comes with an extreme wealth of knowledge. So we're really lucky to have him on our team. And from there, Ed, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Well, once again, Taylor, thank you for the kind words. I'm not seeing the slideshow presentation. I'm seeing this first sheet and then the list of slides over on the left.
Okay, let me see. Hold on one second.
In my view, we didn't see any of those first 4 slides that you showed on the services, etc.
Okay, let's see if it works.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Again, this is kind of an experiment for us, but we think it's going to go well. The Tuesday's webinar seemed to proceed very nicely. Today we're going to talk about how to submit a bid, and this presentation is from the perspective of a subcontractor. And the reason for that is that anyone bidding as a prime to Caltrans or any public agency like BART or City of Concord, etc., the process is absolutely already defined. There's a bid form, you have to have a bid bond, you have to fill out in accordance with the public contract code. It's all determined for you. There is no, you can call it a learning process and you learn it by doing it. However, from a subcontractor's perspective, you're not bidding to the agency, you're bidding to the prime contractor. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So it's an overview on the basic protocol and process of submitting a bid and get an understanding of how to develop a comprehensive scope letter template that's professional and credible. Next. So the same points as Taylor mentioned, we talked about this on Tuesday, but these are worth repeating. The contractual requirements are in the general conditions are again always put out in the specifications. They're covered. Bonding insurance requirements as a prime, I've already talked about that. As a subcontractor, you may or may not be required to bond. That is at the sole discretion of the prime contractor. So as you get ready to prepare an estimate and prepare a sub bid, you know, you have to be aware of the things that you should be doing, which include going to the pre-bid conference, doing a job walk so you get familiar with the project. There's union and non-union issues during bid. I mentioned this on Tuesday, that for the real big projects, say, let's just say 15 million and up, and certainly at 25 million to 100 million, when you look at Caltrans and BART type projects, those generals are pretty much like 98% union contractors. And by virtue of their union contracts with the building trades, they are not allowed to subcontract to any non-union subcontractors. So one thing I always try to talk about in these workshops is simply, if you're a small non-union sub and you're going to bid on one of these public works jobs, and you take a look at that bidders list and they all happen to be union, then you have to make a business decision as to whether you even want to bid the job. Because if you bid and if you're listed because you're low and you are awarded a subcontract, you will be required to become signatory to the union. Something to remember. Subcontractor outreach to general contractors, I think that's extremely important. Actually, more important than general contractor outreach. And the reason being is that the large primes work off a database of DBEs and SBEs and WBEs. But you as a subcontractor should be looking for the jobs you want to bid, get a hold of the list of contractors that are bidding as prime, and you should be sending them your scope letter. And this is what we're going to talk about next. The general conditions cover these issues here. You'll get this on the slide when you get a copy of the slides after today's webinar. And I went over this on Tuesday. I think it's self-explanatory, but that bold lettering on the bid proposal form, keep that in the back of your mind, because that's key as to how you develop your scope letter. Next. So the steps, basically, the way the process works, and it is not a policy, and this is not in the specifications. I call it, for lack of a better term, industry protocol. It's an evolved process that the industry wound up having to develop because of the way public works projects are bid. So the agencies now, in the day of the internet, they all have websites. You should be looking at go to those websites and look under the tab that says doing business with BART, City of San Ramon, etc. And then drill down and find any projects they have out to bid. Open it up, review the project description and the engineer's estimate. The engineer's estimate is a good tool to use to decide whether you even want to bid the job. And by that I mean, if the estimate for this, let's just say a fire station, and it's a $10 million fire station, and you've never done any kind of your specialty trade, you've never done any contracts bigger than $50,000, you might want to take a look at that plans and specs in detail before you decide you're going to bid it, because the scope of work that you could be eligible for just might be out of your capacity. So keep that in mind. You have to review the bid form for the list of bidders. Review the list of primes planning to bid the job. Prepare your scope letter and decide what you want to bid upon. Send the bidding primes your unpriced bid. Start work on your estimate, and then on bid day morning, you're going to send them your priced out scope letter. Next. Quite often in the industry, and in my years of teaching these workshops, I often get the comment, yeah, I bid to so-and-so and they never call me back. Or I bid to this prime contractor and they didn't use my number. Or I've called the estimator and I don't get any help. So that's understandable. The DBEs often feel their bids are ignored or given second-class status, or worse, being shopped around. But you got to remember that putting a bid together on bid day for a public works job of any magnitude is a very complicated and involved process. The general must receive, evaluate, track, and post a multitude of sub-bid information. And you may or may not realize this, but 95% of sub-bids that are submitted to primes on bid day come in the last hour before bid time. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that we're sitting there trying to read a scope letter between 3 electrical sub-bids and trying to make sure that they are bidding the same apples and apples on scope of work and who's the low bidder. So all that takes time, and the more difficult you make your scope letter, the less likely you are to be considered. Next. Your scope letter obviously should be on your letterhead with the information as shown on the sample. The sample we're going to show you at the end of the presentation. But the key point is to prepare a scope letter in the same format as the prime's bid form, because that's the professional way to submit a sub-bid. Following this protocol will ensure that you will receive fair consideration and evaluation of your proposal. Primarily what it does, it immediately signals the general contractor that this bid is coming from a sub who is at least familiar with how the process works. Next. So best practices, of course, start your own estimate early. Do your pre-bid job walk, your quantity takeoffs, develop your spreadsheet at least a week before the project bids. Let me stop and comment on that a minute. I also hear a lot of complaints that a subcontractor will say, yeah, I got a call from a general that wants me to give them a bid on the concrete work. And the job bids day after tomorrow. I have 2 questions for you. Number 1, why are you just now finding out about the job? And 2, where is it written that they have to contact you all the time? And they are required to do a good faith effort of outreach. But in my opinion, it's more productive for you folks as subcontractors to be aware of the project ahead of the time and you making the decision whether you even want to bid it or not. Because the truth be known is that most generals, in order to comply with a good faith effort, they simply go down the list and send out a blast email request and do follow-up phone calls with anybody who responds. It's a lengthy, cumbersome, tiresome way of getting in contact with each other. Sending the scope letter 2 or 3 days ahead of time establishes a much better probability of contact and helps develop a relationship, which is what we're talking about, relationships. Format your spreadsheet to mimic the prime's bid form. That bid form is required by the owner and it's part of the specification. You will see exactly what the prime will be filling out. And on a simple job, they might simply say, bidding contractor agrees to furnish and install, provide one complete fire station, one price lump sum. If that's the case, then all of you will be bidding on a lump sum basis for your subtrade, electrical, concrete, roofing, painting, etc. However, in heavy civil projects like water and wastewater treatment plants, rail jobs, and especially highway jobs, that it's never a lump sum bid. It's a whole list of bid items, each one detailed with a unit price, an estimated quantity, and an extended price. That makes that spreadsheet very difficult and very large for the prime, and you have to bid your bid items of work just exactly as required in the breakdown for the prime's bid proposal. Think of it this way. The type of bid form that I'm talking about is essentially a cost breakdown so that the owner can see this is how much bridge railing is going to cost. This is how much concrete deck will be at so many dollars a square foot, so many lineal feet of fence. And those prices, you have to bid it in the same format. You should be sending out your own request for bids from your suppliers and subs. It's essentially, it all works the same. The bigger the subcontract, the more likelihood you're going to have subcontracts, let alone suppliers. So you need to be contacting those people in order to get your price put together. That's why I always, I will always question anybody who says, I have to get the bid ready in 2 days. You don't even have time to call your suppliers to find out how much the lumber is going to cost, how much the concrete is going to cost, how much the steel is going to cost. So this last minute bidding is a very dangerous practice, and you need to get away from that. When you have your scope letter developed, send it unpriced, send it to the bidding prime, and there's a great reason for that. Next. You call or email the prime's estimator and ask if they received your scope letter. You ask if they have any questions about your proposed scope of work. And if you have any questions about the bid, now's the time to ask. Don't call on bid day. They're way too busy to be answering subcontractors' questions about the bid. The main idea here and the biggest benefit is that sending them an unpriced scope letter, as I said earlier, it tells that bidding prime, this is coming from someone who knows the process, someone who's actually looked at the project. And they might have some very good feedback for you, like, well, I see you're bidding all the electrical work. Would you give me a price on electrical demolition? Which ordinarily an electrician would not do so. Or how about this? We're thinking of buying the generator direct, we the prime. Can you give me a price just to install the generator, standby generator? What you're doing now is that you're having a one-on-one conversation with the lead estimator, and it's developing credibility because you're asking credible questions that could affect how you're going to put your price together and how they would like to see your price. So sending that scope letter early, 2 to 3, 4 days early, is I can't emphasize enough what a good practice that is and how the benefits can accrue. At that time, you can say, when the bid's over, will you give me bid results for my trade? And I say here, after the bid's over, mention that you'll be sending them a tally sheet. Our company is a prime contractor, and a lot of times I'll get a call from, let's just say, a masonry contractor, and they say, "Hey Ed, I see you weren't low on the job, but because they bid to me long enough, they feel they have a relationship. Could you let me know how I stood with the rest of the masonry contractors?" And they send me in the email a 1, 2, 3 with their name, their company name, and their price. And all I have to do is type in the other masonry contractors and their price, and they immediately get a feel, they get a result of how they, as a masonry subcontractor, stacked up against the competition on bid day. Again, it's relationship building, but the real key feedback here is you as a sub are now knowing why you weren't low. You have a tangible result as to what your bid, how it stacked up against the competition. So, but I emphasize the tally sheet issue because the easier you make it for the prime to give you a sub-bid result, the more likely you are going to get a sub-bid result. Next. So what are some of the things that we want to consider in that scope letter? Well, number one, be as clear and concise as possible. Be sure to structure your pricing to match the format dictated in the prime's bid proposal. I'm going to say it again. Structure your pricing to match the format dictated in the bid's prime proposal. If I could pick out one criticism of so many subcontractor clients that I've helped over the years when they're frustrated with bidding to other primes, it's that their scope letter, it just doesn't work. It's not in the right format, it doesn't make sense, and it's got a lot of other issues with it. So that is just a very key item. Always reference the specification section that applies to your work. You do include any and all applicable taxes. Don't leave it to us to calculate and add sales tax to you. You're as a subcontractor, you're obligated to do what I have to do, and that is provide the owner materials, equipment, labor, etc., tax, freight, everything included, no add-ons. So you never you should never fail to include all applicable taxes. Acknowledge all addendums. This is a very important point. For those of you who have experience with bidding on any kind of building project, you know that the architect or engineer quite often issues addendums before the bid day before final bid day. Those addendums are, in essence, updates that reference the plans and specs and say, oh, on sheet A34, we are including we have added a erosion control sheet identifying all of the snow fencing and the various apparatus that has to be installed for erosion control. Those addendums are absolutely a part of the contract. In fact, the prime contractor's bid form has a specific line item for that says, I acknowledge receipt of addendums 1, 2, and 3, and this acknowledgement is included in my bid. That states that prevents a contractor from after the fact saying, well, I didn't get all the addendums, so that change on that I want a change order for that. And the owners and the architects and the engineers will always make sure that the addendums are issued before final bid date. So likewise, that responsibility flows down to you subcontractors. If you're bidding to me and you tell me you acknowledge addendums 1 and 2, but there were actually 4 sent out, then you're not current. And that could seriously affect your pricing and your ability to be low. You should always state any delivery restraints that could affect the schedule. This happens all the time, especially for the big equipment, generators, compressors, HVAC units. The factory will issue a probable delivery schedule when they are pricing the equipment in their emails to the subcontractors. And surprise, surprise, you would be amazed at how often the delivery for a key piece of equipment cannot possibly meet the contract completion date as stated in the plans and specifications. And having that information early enables the prime and the sub to contact the owner and say, hey, wait a minute, you guys want this building done by September 1. We can't even get the sprinkler systems on their HVAC unit or the generator or whatever. We can't get it before the end of August. And there's no way we can install it in 1 day. So if that applies to you, make sure you point that out. Identify any unloading requirements. You know, you're not going to unload electronic switchgear, big heavy valves, rebar, structural. You're not going to unload that by hand. You need equipment. And if it's standard procedure for your trade that the general provide the unloading, then you need to state that in your letter. If appropriate, you can offer alternate pricing for a partial scope, but be very clear. Quite often, the general will say, okay, I'm getting a price for all the trees and plants and sprinkler systems for the landscaping, but would you be willing to, and they include fine grading for the dirt before we do the plantings. Would you be willing to forego the fine grading because my dirt guy is going to level the site and they'll take care of fine grading? So that has to take place in the discussion. Again, having that early submittal of the scope letter helps bring that issue to light. Finally, state how long your price is good for. Another, I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but it's another item that's just so important. It needs emphasizing again and again. It is standard procedure in public works contracts of the nature of the kind I'm talking about, that the prime and thereby the subs hold their price for a minimum of 30 days. Most of the jobs we bid, they require that we hold our price for 60 days. I've seen them for 90 days. I've seen them 1 or 2 for 6 months. Okay, whatever that time frame is, if your sub bid includes some long lead items, then that manufacturer may very well tell you our price is only good for 30 days. So that involves another business decision of how you're going to deal with that supplier to protect yourself against a price increase. Because as I've said in many other workshops, the state, the county, the city, no public agency will ever give you a change order for a price increase of materials. It just isn't done. That price that we give them on bid day is good, even if I don't get an award for 60 or 90 days later. That process, that's part of of the Public Contract Code, and that's just the way the system works. So if you filter that down to you as a subcontractor, you can see how important it is about pricing. And the next question obviously would be from someone, well, my supplier says the price is good for 45 days and that's it. Well, then and the specs say that we have to hold them for 60 days and we might not even get an award for 90 days. How in the world are you going to be protected? Well, you know what? You're not going to be protected if you don't build a contingency into your pricing. And you can point that out to the prime, and the prime will come back and tell you, okay, but I'm not the best judge of how much you expect the price of those air conditioning units to go up. So that'll come back down to you. It's not going to be a decision that I'm going to make for you. So that's a key item I want you to remember. Next. Worst practices. Here's what we don't do, all right? Don't bid alternate items unless they're approved by an A&E firm. I always give a sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek example that if the specs call for gold-plated doorknobs with a ruby in the middle for all the doors in the classroom building, that's how you bid it. It doesn't matter that it's not taxpayer efficient, that it's a stupid requirement, that it's you don't like it. That has nothing to do with it. If it's in the spec, it's black or white, and you bid it as shown. So don't, because if you don't bid it, if you bid an alternate that conceivably costs less, and it's not approved during the submittal process, if you get the job and you submit your spec sheet for that piece of equipment, and the A&E firm says no, the specs say we would only approve one of these three manufacturers, and yours is not included, then you will be obligated to provide what's spec, and if there's a cost difference, it's on you. Very important. Don't include a detailed quantity takeoff unless the bid form calls for it. I am not no general is in the habit of doing a check on your quantities that involving your work. All I want to see from you is I'm bidding electrical work for Division 31, complete for plans and specs, end of statement, and then give me the price. Again, don't exclude taxes or freight on any of your materials or equipment. Don't expect that you're going to dictate any payment terms because, number one, you're going to be signing my subcontract. I'm not going to be signing your proposal. And the payment terms are governed by the owner. And in public works in California, they pay once a month. Don't make a lengthy list of exclusions that are not industry standard for your type of work. I've had sub quotes come in and they say, we require a deposit and we do not accept retention and we do not accept liquidated damages. Well, my answer to those three are no, no, and no. Number one, retention is standard per the contract code. Every agency withholds 5% from each progress statement. It's just, and nobody gives money up front, as I said in the next statement. We don't get a deposit from the owner to start work. And finally, as I said, you're going to be signing my subcontract. I'm not going to be signing yours. Don't wait until 15 minutes before the bids are due. I told you how the logistics work. These bids are never put together ahead of time from a standpoint that you can submit them ahead of time. It's right up to the last minute. We get bids on projects day in and day out, and sometimes as late as 10 or 9 minutes before, and we still have to call our bid runner who's standing at the city clerk's office filling out the bid form, and before they lick the envelope and throw it on the city clerk's desk. So the longer you wait, the more likely you're not going to be considered. And certainly, as I said before, don't wait until bid day to ask questions about the project, about anything related to the project. Next. So when we get to bid day, you just, pretty simple, final few steps. Finalize your price, check it over, have somebody make sure you've got everything covered, and then send it into the bidding primes, email or fax, at least 45 to 60 minutes early. The earlier, the better. I'll give you a sidebar on that. I realize that, and I always use electricians as the example. They are bidding against other electricians, and they are requesting prices on electrical equipment like switchgear and generators, etc. Those suppliers are also bidding against other suppliers. And so they follow the same process. They wait to the last minute to send it to their electrical contractors. And so you don't have any choice. But all I can tell you is that the later your bid comes in, the more likely we won't have time to review it. On the next day, contact the low bidder and ask for results, as I mentioned the process earlier. If they used your number and listed you, send a short congratulatory note. You are now in the process of potentially being awarded a subcontract. So if you've never worked with that contractor before, I'd start getting acquainted. And you can always go to the owner's website to see all bid results, and they'll have a posting of the subcontractors who are listed. Next. Let's look at the scope letter template that we've developed over the years, and Taylor's going to show that here in a minute.
Okay.
Okay. Your letter doesn't have to look exactly like this, but this is a listing of the information that should be on your scope letter, on your letterhead. So the obvious ones are at the top. Company name, address, contact, whether you're union or non-union, phone, fax, license number. This one needs to be updated. We have to add one more category, and that would be your DIR registration number, the Department of Industrial Relations. If you attended Tuesday, you will recall that we now have to pay for the privilege of bidding on these projects to the tune of $400 a year. And if you're not registered, you will not be awarded the contract. As a prime, I have to be registered before I even bid the job. The last three there at the top, on the lower right, your minority or woman-owned or DBE status, and put in your ID number. If you have bonding, you're 10 steps ahead of your competition, because more and more generals are requiring performance and payment bonds from subcontractors. It's just becoming almost a standard. And then the rest of it is we will be bidding on the following project: the name, location, architect, engineer, date, time. We will be quoting spec section number so-and-so, the general heading of that description, and then your specific scope of work. Delivery lead times, you could notice that. Lump sum price, or you're going to do the detail. It would be 4, 5, or 6 bid items. Our price class includes taxes, delivery, installation, complete for plans and specs. That's the one I like to see. Exclusions and qualifications. So this is, again, it's a guideline as to what information needs to be on your scope letter. You follow this outline, I guarantee you, you're going to gain credibility with bidding primes. Last one. So to wrap things up, California Public Contract Code requires that, number one, all bids must be open in public. And if you ever have the chance, I strongly recommend, whether you're bidding a job or not, if you have the opportunity, go to a public bid opening. They're posted, they're held at the owner's, usually conference room. East Bay Mud opens in the boardroom. BART opens in the boardroom. City of San Ramon opens in the city council chambers. Open to the public, no restrictions. We, as the bidding primes, we have to list every sub who will get a subcontract in the amount of 0.5% of our prime bid. So, for example, if I turn a bid in for $1 million, I will have to list every sub on that project I intend to give a contract to of $5,000 or more. All bids are subject to the complete requirements as stated in the California Public Contract Code regarding bonds, insurance, sublisting, etc. If you are listed with the low bidder, you cannot be substituted out without proper justification. There is a process for that. And I'm not going to go into that now, but it's also spelled out in the Public Contract Code. You might want to be aware that the majority of contract awards to primes will take at least 3 to 6 weeks, and sometimes months. Every job that we bid in the last 20 years, I think the average time is 6 weeks. And I think the fastest job we ever got notice of award and a notice to proceed was, I think, 3 weeks. The subcontract will be the prime's standard subcontract, not yours. Also the odds, it's like the lottery. It's a very rare occasion that a first-time sub-bidder gets a contract on their first go-round. So be prepared for doing this a lot of times. Just to show you how bad it could get, during the big recession in 2008, our company had a dry spell bidding as a prime, and we turned in 42 prime bids before we landed one. It's a very competitive industry. Finally, you must be competitive. And that ends my presentation, and I'm open for questions.
All right, thank you, Ed. Let's see here. It looks like we might have a question. So someone says, are you suggesting to send the bid on bid day, not before?
Yeah, I'm talking your priced out bid should be sent on bid day. I wouldn't send it early. It's the unpriced bid letter that you send early. Okay. And we'll give people a minute to type their questions in using that chat function, but we're right at 12:45. We're right on time, so if you need to get off the call, feel free to do so. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're hoping that we get the opportunity to do a lot more of these kind of brief lunchtime webinars. If you have any ideas for topics that would be helpful for you in the future, please reach out to either one of us and let us know. And if you have any feedback or questions or anything about the webinar afterwards, feel free to email me. My email and phone number is on the screen, and Ed's always a resource for you too.
All right, so thank you, everyone. And Ed and I will stay on just for a minute longer to see if there's any more questions.
I see Diane. She's the one that's talking about the bid on bid day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, Diane, the benefit of sending the unpriced letter is so that the scope of services that your firm is planning on providing is made clear to the bidding primes. The reason that everyone waits until the last minute to turn in their bid is it's an unfortunate sidebar to the industry that people shop each other's prices. I in my workshops, I mentioned that it's common practice in the private sector, especially residential. You get a quote for $10,000 to paint your house, and then you turn right around and show that quote to another painter and say, "Can you beat this?" That's not only immoral and not good practice. It's essentially illegal in the public works sector. We're not supposed to do that, but there are primes that will shop your bid. So I wish it were different, but it just happens. So you don't want to send your price in too early, but certainly don't send it in at the last minute.
Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions, Ed. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.